And we are live. All right. We are live on our YouTube live stream. Everything looks good over there. And we are live on our Periscope. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good morning, good morning. I am going to give just a minute for people to come in because this is broadcast 50. And we are at the halfway mark. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning, lovely husband. Thank you for joining us this morning. So I'm just going to give about, let's see, my little clock is going here. So I'll give about 30 more seconds for people to come in. And you can feel free to share this. If you know how to share this, tweet it out. Thank you for those who know how to tweet it out. Those who are sharing to their Facebook page. I am on a semi-break from Facebook. I'm only utilizing my Daring Dialogues page for article posting. And so that is why you will not see me on my Facebook page this week. Just taking some time to hear from the Lord and see what He will do in my life. And what do you know? As soon as I decide to take some time for the Lord, all HE double hockey sticks decides to break loose. Which means I'm definitely on the right track, right? Anybody ever have one of those consecrations that as soon as you decide to go on consecration and give time to the Lord and seek His face and do more intense Bible studies, that all of a sudden, all heck hoopla wants to break loose? And so I'm having one of those kind of consecrations. And you know what? God is like, you know, I took you on this break so you can't even make comments about it. What's going on? You now have been inaugurated into the season of shut up. Because this one, God's gonna have to fix, literally. But all is well. All is well. So I know you all didn't come this morning to see me sip coffee, but the coffee is good. So I'm thankful for it. It's helping me with my vocal cords this morning. I want to share with you a couple of things as we do our trivia and our giveaways today. Most of you who have been following me know that this season, every quarter, we're going to do 100 episodes. So every quarter, once we hit another quarter, we'll do another giveaway. So our next giveaway will be at episode 75. All right. And we did one at episode 25, and this is now episode 50. So for those of you who are new, this is Daring Dialogues, where we discuss a plethora of topics, or rather I share with you a plethora of topics. And if you are in the chat box, you can offer your commentary on those topics. And if you have any questions, you can email me. So how we're going to do this today, first, before I went to bed last night, the Lord began to give me a prophetic word. He had been speaking it to me, but now He is actually what I call when God goes back and says, I want you to say it again, but I want you to pronounce it publicly. And so I'm going to pronounce this word of the Lord to you. And then we're going to do some trivia. And then I'm going to get into our reading, Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust, and defining moments in Black history, reading between the lines. Okay, so we have 4 giveaways today. And let me put up the email address now before we get too far into our session for today. This is the email, all right? And this giveaway is trivia based. So I'm going to read trivia to you, and I'll read it twice, okay? And if you can answer the trivia, you are going to email reachshante@gmail.com with your answer. once you give me your answer, and you are the first person to email me the correct answer, okay, I will give you further instructions on how you can collect your free gift, okay? So I'm going to say that one more time, all right? Some people are like me. They have to hear instructions a little more than once in order to really get it. I'm going to do trivia. When we do the trivia, all right, you're going to email your answer to reachshante@gmail.com. Again, that's reachshante, no spaces, @gmail.com. If you have the correct answer and you're the first person, your email comes in first with the correct answer, then I will give you further directions on how you can collect your free gift. All right? So if you inbox me through Facebook, there's a chance that I may not get it because I'm not on there. Okay? So that's why I'm also asking you to email at reachshante@gmail.com. All right? To participate in today's trivia. And we have 4 trivia questions. The trivia, well, 4 trivia statements. The trivia statements are pretty detailed. All right? So I'm going to read them twice so that you can get all the information and make sure that you can give me a correct answer. So that's for those of you who want to participate in the giveaway. So what has the Lord been saying to me? I recently read a resolution, and I also did post this resolution, and we've talked about it here before, about the United Nations declaring, in case you are an African American or a person of African descent, the United Nations recently declared, in reference to not just America but around the world, that it is the decade of people of African descent. They decided in 2013, all right, that they would declare 2015 to 2024 as the decade of people of African descent. All right. So if you Google UN Declaration, people of African descent, or decade of people of African descent, it will bring up the article on it. And inside of the article, you can actually read the resolution, all right, that was decided in 2013 and went into activation in 2015. So from 2015 to 2024, they are considering this, what we're in right now, as the decade of the descendants of Africa, or people of African descent. And so as I was excited about that, God began to give me some more insight into what actually happened, okay? And so those of you who know me, I'm going to go with God. So whatever God says on the matter, that's what I'm going to go with, and that's what I'm going to stick to, all right? And as I'm learning to go with what God says and stick to what God says, guess what? He is literally shifting things in my life as I do that, all right? As I said before, I've been inaugurated into the spirit of shut up this week, so I can't really talk about it on my page, but I have been given permission to release this, good morning, to the people of African descent, all right? And for those of you who are just coming in, I'll say it one more time. The United Nations decided in 2013 that they would form and write out a resolution. They would put out a proclamation, all right, that from 2015 to 2024 would become the decade to celebrate people of African descent. All right? It's a very long resolution, but as you read it, and if you're hearing by the Spirit of God, you'll begin to understand the implications of the United Nations declaring that this is our time. Because when the United Nations comes together and declares that this is your time, then guess what the enemy tries to do? Some of us going to figure it out. When God decided to tell Moses to go tell Pharaoh to let my people go that they may worship me, Pharaoh didn't take too well to that pronouncement. Matter of fact, he said, I'm going to make things harder for the Hebrews. I'm not going to celebrate the fact that God wants to take them and have worship with them and meet with them in the wilderness. No. I'm going to make things harder on them. So this is what the Lord told me about the United Nations resolution. He said, earth is in agreement with heaven. Listen, that right there just makes me want to shout. He didn't say heaven is in agreement with earth. He said earth is now deciding to line up with what has already been declared in heaven. Exactly. The UN has pronounced that this is the decade of black people. It is our time, people of African descent. The United States, in response, has now decided to label black people or people who have a concern about police brutality and unjust treatment of black people as identity terrorists. Somebody's going to get it in a minute. So this is what the Lord said. He said, earth is in agreement with heaven. It is your time. You will have, listen, you will have whatsoever you say. I wish I had an organ right now. You will have whatsoever you say. Your nation may rise against you, but heaven's government is on your side. Lord, I wish I could just get up and just dance for a moment. I'm going to say it one more time. Your nation may rise against you, but heaven's government is on your side. You must believe it. He said this. He said, reparations will come to those who believe. Not those who believe in their government, but those who believe that heaven's government is on your side. Listen. Listen. Let me do my, ooh, yes, Lord. Just yes and yes. I will open, this is what the Lord says, I will open hands and hearts of those who want to right the wrongs of the past, the shedding of innocent blood, to offer offerings of repentance. God said, I will open the hearts and the hands of those who want to right the wrongs of the past, the shedding of innocent blood, to offer offerings of repentance. Listen, I'm just a messenger, but I tell you one thing, I'm about to fall in line with this here message. Yes, I am. The Lord said, do not trust in your nation to repay you. Trust in me as your ancestors did. One more time. Do not trust in your nation to repay you. Trust in me as your ancestors did. They left Egypt with wealth because I caused the inhabitants to supply them with wealth. Lord have mercy. One more time. Do not trust in your nation to repay you. Trust in me as your ancestors did. They left Egypt with wealth because I caused the inhabitants to supply them with the wealth. Last thing he said, do not look for a formal admittance from your government. Look for my supernatural repayment. It's already activated. Listen. Look for my supernatural repayment. It's already activated. And many of you know I don't do the whole prosperity spiel, but this is God saying your prosperity in this area is being released. So look for supernatural repayment. It's already activated. You have to believe to receive. The wrongs shall be made right by my hand. Listen, 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 people of African descent. Listen. In this season, you cannot afford to be around people talking about we ain't gonna never get XYZ. Listen, when I hear anybody saying that from this point on, I'm like, ooh, can't hear you, can't hear you, can't hear you. I can help. Listen, I can only receive what the Lord has just dropped. He said it is reparations and repayment time for my people. Therefore, I'm going to receive the repayment supernaturally from whoever he wants to send. Whoever wants to give offerings of repentance. Whoever wants to make repayment on behalf of their ancestors for what they know their ancestors have done. Whoever wants to turn over wealth because they know their ancestors have stolen from my ancestors. I want it all. I'm receiving it all. You want to send checks? Listen, you want to send it through PayPal? My info is in the bio. I want it all. However God is speaking to your heart, whatever God is telling you to do, however God is telling you to sow, you go right ahead and sow. All right? Because God said the earth is in agreement with heaven. I said, wait a minute, Lord. Now, wait a minute. This resolution went into effect in 2015. It's 2017. Somebody say retro pay. I was like, thank you, Lord. Take it all the way back to 2015. Yes, God, take it all the way back. And I'm telling you, I believe God. So if God says, this is a time of release for the people of African descent. This is a time for us to be blessed. This is not a time for us to be persecuted. I'm going to go with what the Lord is saying. And so anybody who wants to operate outside of this framework concerning my people, I'm going to turn you over to heaven, okay? Yeah, we in our own life, we shifted supernaturally in 2015. So I'm going to turn you over to heaven because the Lord said heaven's government is on my side. That means if you're not lining up with the government of heaven, I'm going to say, Lord, you see this over here? You see this? I need you to take care of this by governmental authority of heaven. I'm just going to sit, whatever you're doing, I'm going to just send it on up through my intercession. I'm going to send it on up to the heaven's courtroom. I'm going to send it on up to the judge, and I'm going to keep it moving because I need to get everything that the Lord is promising me. So I was like, okay, all right, bless God. I'm going to roll with it. So, yeah. Amen. All right. So, now that we know what the deal is, we can talk more readily about this history that many people still don't understand and don't know. How many of you yesterday encountered people who had no idea some of the things that Christopher Columbus actually did? I did. I encountered some people who didn't know that Columbus never made it to the Americas. I encountered some people who didn't know that Columbus was torturing and abusing natives. They didn't know that. I encountered some people who didn't realize that many states, and I think California is the latest one, to change Columbus Day to Indigenous Day. Many people don't know that that change is happening. So when it does happen in their region, they're going to be asking questions as to, well, why did we remove this day, or why did we change it? And it's going to shock some people. All right. So that's what this Daring Dialogues is all about. It is about learning. It is about growing. And then it is about taking what we learn, teaching other people, helping them to get free of false ideology. All right. So let's go into our next chapter in this book is Slave Trade and Slavery in Retrospect. Slave Trade and Slavery in Retrospect. And this is a very short chapter. And then we're moving right into the Dick Gregory book. In this short appraisal of Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust, I have reopened and re-examined a much written about subject that is still misunderstood by most people. The basis of this misunderstanding is in the fact that most students of the subject look upon the African slave trade as though it were the only system of slavery known to man. Slavery is an old institution, and there were no people who have not at some time in history been a victim of it. The African slave trade can best be understood if we at least take a brief look at the historical roots of slavery as a world institution. Slavery in ancient societies was appreciably different from the type of slavery that was introduced into Africa by the Europeans in the 15th and 16th centuries. Because remember, a lot of people, especially those of the white supremacist mindset, tend to want to refute anything to do with slavery by bringing up this point and saying, well, slavery's been going on for thousands of years. It's happened in all kinds of cultures. You know, what's the big deal about slavery happening in the New World? But here's some of the differences, okay? In most ancient societies, the slave was held in servitude for a limited time. So when you see the terms like slavery in ancient times, they're actually talking about what we would call today indentured servitude. They were held for a limited time for specific reasons, and in most cases, the slaves were captured in local wars. So skin color was not a factor as to whether a person did or did not become a slave. And in most cases, the slave had some rights that the master had to respect. In ancient Egypt, Kush, Greece, and early Rome, there were clearly defined codes of conduct governing the relationship between the slaves and their masters. Some of the earliest of these codes are recorded in the laws of Moses. In the book, The History of Slavery and the Slave Trade by W.O. Blake, published in 1858, the following information related to early slavery is revealed. The Mosaic institutions were rather predicated upon the previous existence of slavery in the surrounding nations than designed to establish it for the first time, and the provisions of the Jewish law upon this subject effected changes and modifications which must have improved the conditions of the slaves among that particular people. How do we know? Because if you go and look in the Old Testament, it talks about the release of the slave. And that if the slave chose to stay with his master, then that slave would put his ear up against a post or door, and the master would pierce his ears. Okay, the master would pierce his ear. This is found in the Old Testament. All right, as a sign that that slave had chosen to stay with his master. So clearly, what he's talking about here is the Hebraic form also must have improved the quality of life of people, because even after that time of being let go from their indentured servitude, some of them chose to stay behind, and therefore they were marked to show that they were there of their free will. All right. There were various modes by which the Hebrews might be reduced to servitude. A poor man might sell himself to pay off a debt. A father might sell his children to pay off a debt for a particular amount of time. Debtors might be delivered as slaves to their creditors. Thieves who were unable to make restitution for property stolen were sold for the benefit of the sufferers. Prisoners of war were subjected to servitude. And if a Hebrew captive was redeemed by another Hebrew from a Gentile, he might be sold to another Israelite. At the return of the year of Jubilee, all right, and even if you look at the English form of indentured servitude, they both had the same amount of time, which was 7 years. At the return of the year of Jubilee, all Jewish captives were set free. So you cannot compare what you see in biblical times and in scripture to what happened in the Americas, which is what a lot of people like to do. However, by some writers, it is stated that this did not apply to foreign slaves held in bondage, as over those the master had entire control. The law of Moses provides that if a man smite his servant or his maid with a rod, and he die under his hand, he shall be surely punished. So if you were a master over an indentured servant in scripture and you beat them to death, you were punished. That did not happen in American slavery, people. All right. This restriction is said by some to have applied only to Hebrew slaves and not to foreign captives. Mosaic laws declared the terms upon which a Hebrew who had been sold could redeem himself or be redeemed by his friends, and his right to take with him his wife and children when discharged from bondage. So there's another difference. Once they redeemed themselves, they could take their wife and children with them. In American slavery, once you redeemed yourself, you had to go back and you had to work or had to earn a living to try to redeem your wife and try to redeem your children. All of those were separate processes, and sometimes that master could refuse to sell your wife and your child to you. So the main point of this reference is that the slaves of the ancient world were considered with some humanity. This was nonetheless true of ancient Asia and Africa. In fact, in Africa, in both ancient and modern times, slaves have been known to rise above their servitude and become kings in the very houses in which they had been slaves. The very fact that slavery existed in West Africa prior to contact with Europeans is often used to excuse European slave trade. The two systems had few similarities. The tragic and distinguishing feature of the slave trade that was introduced by the European was that it totally dehumanized the slave. This dehumanization continued in many ways throughout the slavery period and well into the colonial era. This crucial act was supported by a rationale that was, now, dun 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 dun. These crucial acts of dehumanizing slavery was created in part by the Christian church. Dear Christian church, when you are not honest about the complicit hand that you have had in creating some of the greatest atrocity to ever occur in human history, then yes, when people find out that you took a part in it, that you helped to create the rationale for it, that you spiritualize dehumanizing human beings, when people find that out, yes, they're going to be ticked off. And then when you continue to deny your hand of complicity in it, there are going to be a bunch of other words that I don't say anymore because God has sanctified my tongue. But the reality is, when the Christian church does not take responsibility for our complicity in this atrocity, all right, then yes, people are going to be upset. Yes, people are going to be angry. Yes, some people are going to say, you know what? I'm done with the organized, listen, organized, institutionalized form of serving God. And you have people who are still in denial. So this is the poop that's sitting at the altar that we have yet to scoop up. We dancing over it. We shouting over it. We having prayers on the National Mall. But this poop is still sitting on the altar, and God is like, when are y'all gonna clean this up? When is the church gonna deal with this poop on the altar? We'll deal with all the other stuff around it, but that one's still sitting there. All right. So this rationale that was created in part by the Christian church and later extended by the writers of the 17th and 18th century. The myth of a people with no history and culture comes out of this period. So not only did you justify it spiritually, but then you helped to spread a myth that the people you're enslaving had no history and no culture. And then you beat it out of them. Any memory that they did have, for the most part, many of them, it was beaten out of. Now, I just found out about a settlement. I can't remember the town it's in, but there was a settlement. They call it the last of the slave settlements, where the slaves there actually kept their African heritage and traditions. But that's only one that we know of. So this myth of a people with no history and culture comes out of this period. All myths are contagious, and one can create many others. This fact can be better understood after some insight into how and why the slave trade came to be. Early in the 15th century, Europe began to recover from the wounds of the Middle Ages and the Crusades. In other words, after they got through beating up, shooting up, stabbing, wounding, and killing each other, and then they came out of that period, all right, they began to recover from that. European skill in shipbuilding had improved, and in search of a food supply for their hungry population, because they've been through famine and disease and war, and for new worlds to conquer, Europeans began to venture beyond their shores. There are many reasons why the Europeans had not embarked upon worldwide exploration before this time. Their ships were small and unsafe for long sea journeys. Oars of the ships were sometimes used to propel these ships, and the outcome of all voyages depended largely on the wind. There were no good maps or instruments earlier to guide sailors through unknown waters. So that's why they were not venturing out before then. At that time, most Europeans were ignorant about the shape of the world, and some of them thought it was flat. The Portuguese set out to disprove this, and about the middle of the 15th century, they began trading with the people along the west coast of Africa, to which they gave the name Guinea after the Sudanic Empire of Ghana. At first, they traded mainly in gold, but before long, they began to take those indentured servants or slaves also. Social and political unrest began to develop among some of the nations of West Africa. At the time, Europe was beginning to regain its strength and a degree of unity. The first Europeans to visit the west coast of Africa did not have to fight their way in. They came as guests and were treated as guests. Later, they decided to stay, because it seems like every time you get an opportunity to be a guest, all of a sudden you have to turn into a conqueror. That's a whole other teaching. They came as guests and were treated as guests, but later they decided to stay as conquerors and slave traders. In order to gain a position strong enough to attain these ambitions, they began to take sides in African family disputes. Still going on today. How do you take over a nation? You get in and you send men on one side of the dispute with the Arabs, Sunni Shiites. Then you send more people on the other side of the dispute and saying, hey, I'm with you all. Meanwhile, you're manipulating both sides to come against each other, to fight and kill each other so that you can take possession of the land and the resources. Still happening. All right. So they gained this position. They began to take sides in African family disputes. This is why, to this day, some disputes need to stay among Africans. Hint, hint. Very often supplying the family or tribe they favored with arms and using their favorites as slave catchers. A number of African nations went into the slave trade in order to buy guns. And you know, we've already done a segment on guns and the importance of that to maintaining white supremacy worldwide. And other European manufactured items. Others were forced to capture slaves or become slaves. The Europeans did not come to Africa initially to find slaves. For years, they had been hearing stories about the great riches of Africa. At the Battle of Ceuta against the Muslims in 1415, Prince Henry of Portugal, who later became known as Prince Henry the Navigator, heard about the prosperity of Timbuktu and the wealth of the great states along the west coast of Africa. He had also heard stories about a great African Christian king named Prester John. Did I hear that right? Whoa, 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 whoa. Great African Christian king? You mean to tell me that we didn't get our Christianity from Europeans? Okay. Before the end of the 15th century, the Portuguese sailors had come to know the general shape of the continent of Africa. So all of this time that people are going back and forth and trading, they are also trying to learn where things are. They're trying to learn the shape of Africa. They're trying to learn who has the wealth and how they can get to it. Right? They traded regularly with African countries from 1471 on. Forts were built along the coast of West Africa. The most famous of those forts is still in existence, which is the Elmina Castle in what is now Ghana. A lot of people who visit Ghana go to that site, the Elmina Castle. This fort was started in 1482 by a Portuguese captain, Don Diego de Azambuia. Because of the large profits gained by the Portuguese in their trading in this country, they began to call it the Gold Coast. During the latter half of the 15th century, European nationalism was reflected in the expansion of trade in both sales and manufactured goods. The marriage of Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand gave Europe the unity they needed to drive out the Arabs and the Moors. Both Spain and Portugal were becoming powerful Mediterranean nations. Then in 1488, Bartholomew Diaz had sailed around the southern tip of Africa. About 10 years later, another Portuguese sailor that I know I learned him in school, Vasco da Gama, sailed past the point reached by Diaz. With the help of an Arab pilot, Vasco da Gama reached India in 1498. For Europe, the door to the vast world of Asia was open. The rationale for justifying the slave trade had already started in Europe, with Europeans attempting to justify the enslavement of other Europeans. This is a neglected aspect of history that is rarely taken into consideration. There was a concerted effort to obtain European labor to open up the vast regions of the New World. In what became the United States, white enslavement started before black enslavement. In an article, White Servitude in the United States, published in Ebony in the November 1969 Afro-American Historian, in the November 1969 issue, the African-American historian Lerone Bennett Jr. gives the following information about this period. When someone removes the cataracts of whiteness from our eyes, and we look with unclouded vision on the bloody shadows of the American past, we will recognize for the first time that the Afro-American, who was so often second in freedom, was also second in slavery. Indeed, it will be revealed that the African American was third in slavery, for he inherited his chains, in a manner of speaking, from the pioneer bondsmen who were red and white. This is the truth. The enslavement of both red men, or Native Americans, and white men in the early American colonies was a contradiction of English law. The colonies were founded with the understanding that neither chattel slavery nor villanage would be recognized. Yet forced labor was widely used in England. This system was transferred to the colonies and used to justify a form of slavery that was visited upon red and white men. All right. It was decreed that the apprentice must serve his 7 years and take floggings as his master saw fit. So again, it was initially supposed to be a form of indentured servitude. The hired servant must carry out his contract for his term of service. Convicts of the state, often including political offenders, were slaves of the state, and then they were sometimes sold to private owners overseas. The colonists claimed those rights over some of their white fellow countrymen. There was a large class of redemptioners who had agreed that their service should be sold for a brief term of years to pay their passage money from England over to the colonies. And of indentured or indented servants brought their masters under legal obligation, who served even longer terms, subject to the same penalties of branding, whipping, and mutilation as African slaves. These forms of servitude were supposed to be limited in duration and transmitted no claim upon the servant's children. So when people say, well, what's the difference between what happened to white people under this program and red people and black people? Two things. The servitude did not become forever and unlimited, and the servitude did not transfer to their children and their children and their children's children and their children's children. Those were the differences, okay? In spite of this servitude, the presumption in law was that a white man was born free and could be indentured as a slave. There was a time period, there was a time frame, and it did not extend to his children. By contrast, black men became born enslaved because your slavery transferred to your children. The English settlers had at once begun to enslave their Indian neighbors, soothing their consciences with the argument that it was right to make slaves of pagans. In large numbers, the Indians fled or died in captivity, leaving few of their descendants in bondage. The virgin soil of the new English settlements continued to need more labor. This led to a fierce search for white labor that subsequently led to a search for black labor. Bennett continues, it has been estimated that at least 2 out of every 3 white colonists worked for a term of years in the fields or kitchens as semi-slaves. White servitude was the historic foundation upon which the system of black slavery was conducted. There is a need to examine the slave trade and slavery and the role of Christopher Columbus and his voyages in setting this great tragedy in motion. I'm attempting to examine the slave trade and slavery with fresh insight and with a focus on long neglected aspects of the subject. Africans played a major role in opening up the New World for European settlement. Their labor and the raw material taken from their countries were important features in the development of the European Industrial Revolution. So, the slave trade in retrospect. Next week, we'll look at the slave trade, how and why it started. All right. So I don't want to run out of time for my giveaways, so let me go ahead and do those first. And then if we have some time, we will read a little bit today from Dick Gregory's book. My first giveaway is this lovely Vera Bradley journal, along with, as you write, some of my music, a soothing download card for your enjoyment. Let me put up the email again. First person to answer correctly, email your answer to reachshantae@gmail.com. So put some hearts on the screen if you are ready for trivia. Are you ready? All right, here we go. First trivia. On September 15th, 1963, white American terrorists planted a bomb at this church, an African American church in Birmingham, Alabama. The resulting explosion was the third bombing in 11 days, followed by a court-ordered desegregation of Birmingham city schools. The blast killed 4 young girls and injured 22 others, shocking the nation and triggering protests in Birmingham and everywhere else. What place was bombed? I'll say it one more time. On September 15th, 1963, white American terrorists planted a bomb in this church, an African American church in Birmingham, Alabama. The resulting explosion was the third bombing in 11 days, following a court-ordered desegregation of Birmingham city schools. The blast killed 4 young girls and injured 22 others, shocking the nation and triggering protests in Birmingham and elsewhere. Where did the bomb happen? All right. Question number 2. Question number 2, giveaway, is a very, very interesting book. If you love conspiracy theories that are actually not theories, you will really enjoy this book. It is called 100 Things You're Not Supposed to Know. Some of the topics in here has to do with the truth about Barbie, the truth about Native Americans, the truth about lynching victims. It's got all kind of subject matter. The truth about prescription drugs, lots of stuff. So if you like conspiracy theory, everything in this book is true, and it actually has reference. Of course, I love to give books that have reliable references in sourcing in the back. All right. So here is the question for this giveaway. Founded in Oakland, California in 1966, this group took action in defense of African American communities against police brutality and racist policies. This group developed innovative community survival and service programs to protect and strengthen Black neighborhoods. This group supported health clinics, liberation schools, free breakfast programs, and clothing distribution centers, as well as confronted injustice within the legal system. Who is this group? I'll read it one more time. Founded in Oakland, California in 1966, this group took action in defense of African American communities against police brutality and racist policies. This group developed innovative community survival and service programs to protect and strengthen Black neighborhoods. This group supported health clinics, liberation schools, free breakfast programs, and clothing distribution centers, as well as confronted injustice within the legal system. Who is this group? And I guess some people know who it is because they have hopped off and probably gone to email me. All right. Okay. All right. Next giveaway is a lovely journal. As you can see it up close, it's got some gold embellishments on the front. And it's also, I think you can actually color it in or design it. It's in its front and back. So this is a journal. All right. Question for this giveaway. This is defined as the basic, inalienable things that every person should have as defined by the Constitution, regardless of sex, race, or religion. Throughout American history, Black Americans have struggled to attain this to which everyone is due. What are they? These things are defined as the basic, inalienable thing every person should have as defined by the U.S. Constitution, regardless of sex, race, or religion. Throughout American history, African Americans have struggled to attain this to which everyone is due. What is it? What is it? All right. And our last giveaway is one of my favorite books that we actually read from. And somebody's going to get a copy. Saints and Scoundrels of the Bible. The Good, the Bad, and the Downright Dastardly. So if you love Bible study and you want to hear some stories of Bible characters from a very interesting perspective, in a very entertaining perspective, but yet still biblical, this is for you. All right, our last and fourth giveaway. Here we go. Located in Harlem at 142nd Street and Lenox Avenue, this place was a most famous night spot in New York for nearly 2 decades and attracted members of high society. It provided a platform for prominent African American jazz musicians, singers, and dancers. Duke Ellington's orchestra was the band, followed in 1931 by Cab Calloway and his Missourians. This place relocated to Midtown Manhattan until it closed in 1940. What is it? I'll read it again. Located in Harlem at 142nd Street and Lenox Avenue, this place was the most famous night spot in New York for nearly 2 decades and attracted members of high society. It provided a platform for prominent African American jazz musicians, singers, and dancers. Duke Ellington's orchestra was the house band, followed by Cab Calloway and his Missourians. This place relocated in Midtown Manhattan until it closed in 1940. What is this place? All right. So, after I get done, I will make sure I check my email and I will see who is giving me the first answer to those questions. All right. So, as we close, we've got about 8 minutes. Let's see what we can get through today in Dick Gregory's book, Defining Moments in Black History, Reading Between the Lies. All right, last time we left off at John Brown, and encourage you all to do a little bit of study on John Brown, who was, as Dick Gregory said, probably one of the most influential men to what happened with slavery and why. Well, not what happened with slavery, what happened with the Civil War and why the Civil War had to happen. So let's see if we can learn a little bit about the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment and something called Jocko, which I didn't learn about Jocko until I moved to Virginia. I had no idea what this thing was, but Dick Gregory gives some history behind it. The 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment. The next time you hear someone say black people don't want to do anything to help themselves, tell them about the black soldiers who enlisted in the Union Army during the Civil War. See what they have to say then. Some folks would have you believe that exactly 2 black people fought in the war, Morgan Freeman and Denzel Washington. Because that's whom everybody remembers from the movie Glory. Truth is, 186,000 black soldiers enlisted. Around 50,000 came from free states, and another 40,000 came from what they called the border states. These were slave states that had not seceded from the Union. In those states, some fought for the Union and some for the Confederacy. But the biggest number of black soldiers, about 93,000, came from the southern states that had left the Union. All of them were called the United States Colored Troops. Mostly they were led by white officers. The white officers weren't exactly fighting each other over the chance to command these black men. That changed, though, after the blacks proved they could fight well and bravely, and after their regiment started to make a name for themselves. Just like anything else, something starts to get popular, and all of a sudden, everybody wants to have something to do with it, or else they claim they already do. This was no different with the black soldiers. 4 men from the all-black 54th Massachusetts Infantry, that's the regiment whose story is told in the movie Glory, won medals for gallantry after their assault on Fort Wagner on Morris Island, South Carolina in July 1863. They were gallant, all right. A whole bunch of them gave up their lives. Just like everything else with black folks, the first thing black soldiers had to do was convince white folks that they were up to the job. At first, the Union didn't want them. When the Civil War was heading up into its 3rd year and the South was showing no signs of giving up, getting help from black soldiers finally started to seem like a good idea. After Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation freeing the slaves, a black leader in Boston named Lewis Hayden convinced the abolitionist governor of Massachusetts, John Andrew, to put together a regiment of black soldiers. And that is how the 54th was born. A Union general, Quincy Gilmore, wanted to capture South Carolina, which a lot of folks thought was the heart of the Confederacy. To do that, they had to get past a few strongholds, and one of them was Fort Wagner. Trying to take out Wagner was like trying to knock somebody out in the boxing ring. Wagner was on a strip of land with the Atlantic on one side and a swamp on the other side. The fort was 30 feet high, 250 by 100 yards in size, and made of sand. That might not sound very strong, but it was fortified with logs and sandbags, and it had wooden spikes in front of it, sharp enough to go right through you, plus landmines. Step on one of those, and it'd be the last step you ever took in your life. Wagner had a moat around it too. And did I mention the 14 cannons sticking out of it? I give those Southern folks this much. They knew how to play defense. The Union wasn't stupid. They knew if they just charged Fort Wagner, they'd get shot down like ducks. So before they did, they tried firing shells at it. Problem was, Wagner had what they called a bomb-proof, roof beams with 10 feet of sand on top of them. The 54th spent most of the day shooting shells at it. And after about 11 hours, it was still standing. Still, the Union figured if they had softened it up enough, the soldiers could take it. And that's where the 54th came in. One of them was Lewis Henry Douglas, Frederick Douglass's son. They were commanded by Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, a skinny white dude who wasn't but 25 years old. His parents were abolitionists. At that point, Colonel Shaw ordered 624 men from the 54th to quickly march in with muskets and bayonets. As they got closer to Fort Wagner, they started to jog. When they were close enough, the Confederates inside the fort fired on them. Some of the 54th fell, but the others kept going. The wooden spikes didn't stop them. They climbed right over them. The moat didn't stop them either. All the shelling had half filled it with sand. But the Confederates didn't stop firing either. The 54th got mowed down. Colonel Shaw got killed too, as did the waves of soldiers the Union sent in after the 54th. When it was all over, the fort still hadn't fallen. The 54th didn't succeed that day, but they were as brave as anyone, and they were fighting for black people's freedom and for the country to keep it in one piece, North and South. They made the biggest sacrifice that you can make. Jocko. The way something looks is not always the way it is, and what white folks say is definitely not always the truth. Do I really have to remind you of that? For instance, when I was a boy, a friend of mine and I used to go out in the suburbs and throw bricks at those little black jockeys. Now, if you have been to Virginia, I'm not sure, I don't think I've ever seen them outside of Virginia. But I know in Virginia, some people, where they have these little light posts in front of their porch, it's a black jockey or someone who rode a horse. They're sitting at the edges of their porches and they have this little lamp in their hands. Now, I've heard different stories about where does that come from. But Dick Gregory gives an explanation of that I had not heard of before. So I want to share this with you. He says, I used to throw bricks at those little black jockeys. You know, the ones you see holding lanterns on white folks' lawns. Then one day I said, hey, something's not right about this. Jockeys don't carry lanterns. So we decided to see what was up. We got to looking and looking and looking, and then I found out that the jockey who started it all, the one behind those statues, wasn't a jockey at all. He was a 14-year-old boy, and are you ready? He was General George Washington's #1 war strategist. His name was Jocko Graves. He was the son of Tom Graves, a free black man in Washington's army. Jocko wanted to fight in the army too, but he was too young. That didn't stop him from traveling with Washington and the troops. That little black boy wanted to go, so he went. Simple as that. One morning, Jocko saw General Washington and it looked like something was bothering him. So Jocko said, what's wrong, Pop? Washington said, nothing. Jocko said, come on, you are worried about something. So Washington told him, we think the British are going to come in at this point down here and we'll be waiting for them, but there's also a possibility they'll come in from over there. I can't divide my troops. The little 14-year-old said, don't worry, I think you're right, but give me that lantern. If they come that way, I can see them if they come around that bend. It turned out George Washington was right. His army battled the British all night and killed them all. When Washington ran over to where Jocko was holding that lantern to keep a lookout for the British, he saw that the boy had frozen to death. Now that's loyalty. That's why I say you can't trust what white folks tell you on this. They reduced that story down to just some little tar black jockey looking kid holding a lantern on white folks' lawn, when the real story is about loyalty. 14-year-old black boy froze to death to protect the American revolutionaries. Even the white folks who know the story tell it wrong. According to them, Jocko froze to death holding the reins of Washington's horses. This shows Jocko's loyalty, but holding reins didn't require brains. Don't pay attention to that mess. I've given you today Dick Gregory, Defining Moments in Black History, Reading Between the Lies. I want to thank you for your participation today. I know we are a little bit out of time, past our time, but I want to say thank you again for participating in Daring Dialogues. Thank you for participating in our trivia and our giveaway. And I hope that you've learned something today that you did not know before. Remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness. So please go out today and be light. Take care and God bless. And I want to say thank you for those of you who are watching by YouTube live stream. If you also participated in the trivia, remember, you can email me at reachshantae@gmail.com for the answers. And the first correct answer gets the prize. Thank you again. Take care and God bless.